First, I'd like to have people here talk a little bit about what it is that they cover or what it is that they do to give people a sense of their perspective onto the issue, and then we will launch the discussion. So we're going to start with you and why you started investigating the great world of internships. And everyone can take just a few minutes.
Thanks, Sarah. Every year, millions of people labor as interns in offices around the world, between a third and half of them unpaid, many more underpaid, saving companies billions of dollars in wages each year, displacing untold thousands upon thousands of regular full-time workers. Internships have emerged as a virtual prerequisite, a gateway into the white-collar world. They've come from almost nowhere, having been just something in the medical profession, starting all the way back in the late 19th century, and even into the 1960s, 1970s. The basic assumption was that if you were an intern, that meant you were a young doctor transitioning from medical school into being a kind of fully paid-up member of the medical profession. Internships in the last 3 or 4 decades, what I talk about as the internship boom or the internship explosion, have become general across the white-collar world. They've become the sort of white-collar answer to the apprenticeship. But in many, many ways, they are inadequate compared to real registered apprenticeships that you have in the blue-collar trades, where workers are being paid. They're usually being paid a living wage or something close to a kind of the local wage in that industry. They usually have health care. There usually is a very kind of rigorous, structured kind of training regime, a certain number of hours that you need to be trained. Internships, on the other hand, are incredibly informal. They've just sort of exploded all over the landscape. Just to give a kind of statistical indication of that, in 1980, something like 3% of college students did at least one internship before they graduated. Now, out of college students at four-year schools across America, 75% do at least one internship before they graduate. And in many fields, and many particularly influential fields, where the salaries are higher and where the influence is greater in our society, film, politics, entertainment, media, a whole range of professions. If you don't do an internship, or more likely 2, 3, 4, 5 internships, you stand very little chance of breaking into the profession. So there are two kind of major effects that this has that I examine in Intern Nation and other things that I've written. On the one hand, you have an internship system that is itself broken and that does not follow the sort of very fundamental ethic of a fair wage, or at least a wage for a hard day's work. And so you have this sort of progressive devaluing of labor to the extent where people my age, I'm 29, I started this research after being an unpaid intern myself in 2006, putting in hundreds of hours of work, core work for an organization, and I simply assumed that this was something I had to do. I took it for granted, as did most people that I knew, most of my friends, that you did an internship, or you did however many it took, however many you could bear, so on the one hand, you have the kind of normalization of a culture of unpaid work with internships. And on the other hand, you have people who can't afford to break into this system. You have a pay-to-play system where if you want to enter these fields, and if you want to enter the world of white-collar work, which is increasingly where the salaries are still such that you can live a middle-class or higher kind of life, you need to be able to work unpaid for a certain period of time. So for people who can't, first of all, who are not at a four-year college, the vast majority of students in general, and particularly students at community colleges, have to work regular paid jobs to put themselves through school. So to be able to do an unpaid internship on top of that is an added burden. So the larger effect that we're just beginning to see sort of playing itself out of that is the complexion of these professions is changing. Or in some cases where the profession already was hostile to having people from working class backgrounds, that is being reinforced by an internship system which makes you pay to play. So the range of voices that we hear in politics, media, film, and so on is being narrowed by internships, or internships are playing a role that sort of the elitism of the educational world used to play, or internships are reinforcing that. So just panning out very briefly, as I was working on the book, at first I was really narrowly focused on internships. How had this happened? How had this whole system of unpaid work? I'm not saying all internships are unpaid, but a huge percentage of them are, and there's a deep association of internships and lack of pay or being underpaid. Where had this come from? How did it become so normalized? I began to become aware slowly that internships were really just one form of precarious labor, and that they were part of a kind of explosion of roles, which I'm sure that we're all going to talk about, but of part-time, temporary, seasonal, casual, contract, on-call, sessional, independent, intermittent, temporary, flexible, project-based, freelance, fractional, underemployed, leased, contingent, precarious roles. I say all those words, I say that litany just to kind of switch us on to just what a wild explosion of terms there is here, and how hard it is to kind of get a grasp on. So maybe I'll just end by mentioning kind of the three questions that that I'm hoping we'll kind of get into today, and I'm sure people will have different ways of addressing. But is precarious labor, which I think is certainly useful as a kind of an analytical category. It really helps you understand a lot of changes in the labor market, a lot of changes in the youth labor market in particular over the last 30 or 40 years. Is it just a very useful analytical academic category? Something that we can kind of use to understand the world situation, or the situation just in the labor market here in the States? Or is it also a useful organizing tool? Is it an identity that people will be willing to organize around? Second question, should we on the left in the labor movement sort of think about just rolling back precarity and precariousness and try to go back to a supposed golden age of standard employment in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, into the 1970s that kind of underpinned a lot of the social welfare network and a lot of the relative security of the middle class at that time, despite the problems? Or should we embrace precariousness as an organizing opportunity and challenge? And then the third question, and then I'll stop here, is just whether whether we can find common cause between these different categories of precarious labor, whether interns and migrant workers and freelancers and independent contractors and so on, all and these questions all overlap, of course, but can all find common cause. Or whether separate movements need to first be built up in each area, and internships are really kind of I think interns are kind of at the most initial stage probably of all of these of all of these categories of precarious labor, because there are almost no statistics, almost nobody is sort of even conscious of internships as an issue, and that was what I tried to kind of accomplish with my book, was just to sort of pull it together and start thinking about it, start a debate, and it's only in the very initial stages.